gotta calm my heart. I look into myself and evaluate my actions. I admit that I'm lost. Did everything mean nothing? I fear my conscience calling that I can make something with my life, make a change and improve. Doesn't have to be big, it's something I gotta do. I need to change myself, my words and my actions. Conscience pulls me through, yeah. Me and you, as humans, from purity we stray away. Conscience, the inner compass, can lead the way. Conscience is knowing what's right from wrong. Conscience is our guide to a peaceful world. Happiness, the most important thing. Like the bell of peace, make your voices ring. Spread your happiness, bring your friends along. We can get through this with the same goal.
Listen to your conscience, love yourself.
Love yourself.
Listen to your conscience, love the world.
Love the world.
It's your only home, you're not alone.
Not alone.
With our conscience we can stand as one.
Stand as one.
Listen to your conscience, no anger.
Just smile.
Listen to your conscience, no worries.
Let it go.
Listen to your conscience, no tension.
Just relax.
Don't give up, we'll get through this. La 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 la. La 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 la. Listen to your conscience, love the world. Hold on, don't give up. We will get through this.
Tell me, is it just me or are you worried too?
Yeah.
Worried about the world that we're heading to. Suffering too much, we've all had enough.
Let's make a change, let's hit restart.
We celebrate conscience on April 5th. Being kind and honest, spread your love. Gather your friends, our conscience awakens.
Uniting, protecting, we're all in common.
Now we all know about this viral pandemic. People dying and we're losing many paramedics. This new disease,
It's all in the air.
country shutting down.
What? I mean everywhere.
Be selfless.
Wear masks.
For health.
Wash your hands.
For true love.
Stay at home.
Be kind.
Save the world.
We're far apart, but our heart is close. We can get through this with the same goal.
Listen to your conscience, love yourself. Listen to your conscience, love the world. It's our only home, you're not alone. With our conscience we can stand as one. Listen to your conscience, no anger. Listen to your conscience, no worries. Listen to your conscience, no tension. Hold on, don't give up, we'll get through this.
When the world slows down, I gotta calm my heart. I look into myself and evaluate my actions. I admit that I'm lost. Did everything mean nothing? I fear my conscience calling that I can make something with my life, make a change and improve. Doesn't have to be big, it's something I gotta do. I need to change myself, my words and my actions. Conscience pulls me through, yeah. Me and you, as humans, from purity we stray away. Conscience, the inner compass, can lead the way.
Lead the way.
Conscience is knowing what's right from wrong. Conscience is our guide to a peaceful world. Happiness, the most important thing. Like the bell of peace, make your voices ring. Spread your happiness,
Come on.
bring your friends along. We can get through this with the same goal.
Listen to your conscience, love yourself.
Love yourself.
Listen to your conscience, love the world.
Love the
It's our
world.
only home, you're not alone.
Not
With our
alone.
conscience we can stand as one.
Stand as one.
Listen to your conscience, no anger.
Just smile.
Listen to your conscience, no worries.
Let it go.
Listen to your conscience, no tension.
Just relax.
Don't give up, we'll get through this. La 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 la. La 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 la. Listen to your conscience, love the world. Hold on, don't give up. We will get through this.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us to celebrate a very special observation. Today, we are celebrating the United Nations International Day for Countering Hate Speech. In July 2021, the United Nations General Assembly highlighted global concerns over the exponential spread and proliferation of hate speech around the world and adopted a resolution on promoting interreligious and intercultural dialogue, intolerance, and countering hate speech. The resolution recognizes the need to counter discrimination, xenophobia, and hate speech and calls on all relevant actors, including states, to increase their efforts to address this phenomenon in line with international human rights laws. Tackling hate speech is important because spreading hateful rhetoric can be an early warning of violence, so limiting hate speech could contribute to mitigating its impact. The United Nations created a video to talk about hate speech and the consequences, as well as what you can do to prevent the next atrocity. Let's take a look.
We all know that no child is born with hate. Hate is taught. We must pay attention to hate speech, what it can do, its capacity to completely destroy, its capacity to completely dehumanize. We need to understand that no society in the world is immune from hate speech. I've just come back from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, and I spent a lot of time among the Rohingya people. Hate speech was employed to dehumanize the Rohingya, referring to them as subhuman, referring to them as fleas, referring to them as thorns that needed to be removed. And ultimately, that is precisely what happened. By the time they arrived in Bangladesh, they had gone through decades of torture, decades of displacement, decades of dehumanization. And this hate speech that has been employed is something that we must pay attention to. There's a lot of information on Bosnia-Herzegovina, on what happened in Srebrenica. The hate speech that preceded and accompanied the killing of the men and boys in Srebrenica. There's a lot of information on the Tutsi in Rwanda and the moderate Hutu, and the hate speech that was used to describe the Tutsi, how they were dehumanized. We need to look at what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. We need to see how much hate speech was employed, to the extent that propaganda really was just spewing out hate speech against the Jews, describing them in ways that were designed to make it possible for the ordinary person on the street to just get out and participate in either killing the Jews or reporting on them or getting rid of them. So my message really to everybody is that genocides happen within communities. Genocides happen to you and me. When a genocide unfolds, the people targeted are people who are ordinary, and we must keep paying specific attention to the narratives that we pass on from one generation to the other. They are narratives in which communities share the trauma they experienced, and they pass it on to their children. We all know that no child is born with hate, that hate is taught. And we know that the first step of socialization for a child is the family. The child begins to hear about hate from parents, from siblings. They begin to hear about stereotypes, about other ethnic communities, about other racial, religious communities, and they begin to understand that there is something called an other, that there is us and then there is the other. We then move to the schools, and then we keep being socialized, this time by the media, by religious organizations, by political issues that we see happening. At this point, the child is now probably getting into university, and they've begun to internalize hate. They have the stereotypes in place, they have the prejudices in place. Then what that means is that that adult who was a child born without hate becomes the person who continues the next circle of socialization. And ultimately, what happens is that when people begin to fight each other, especially at the local level, then we'll have a war on our hands, and we know how difficult it is to stop wars. So what that means is that we must find ways to keep interrupting that circle of socialization through education, through knowledge, through having friends from different ethnic, racial, religious communities. And what I've learned is that the same tools that are used to spread hate often turn out to be the best tools to counter hate speech. So for example, the cell phone, it's become a tool that's almost indispensable to many people. And it's also become a tool in which hate speech is spread through social media. The same tool can be used to counter hate speech. Social media, it's still an extremely useful tool of engagement. We just need to know how to speak to the issues that people need addressed. We must have conversations with our children and tell them not to fear difference, and tell them that difference is a really good thing. It's the perspectives that each brings to the table are perspectives that you would never hear if you just stayed with people who look and speak like you.
Indeed, social media, advanced technologies, and of course, AI are all great tools for us to utilize and spread the good. Having conversations with children as they start engaging these medias is important to help them understand the impact of their words so they are able to put these great tools to good use. In celebration of the International Day for Countering Hate Speech, Dr. Hong Daozi, president of the Federation of World Peace and Love, has prepared a message, Healing Hatred and Division with Love and Conscience. Let's welcome Dr. Hong's message.
Distinguished guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, good day. In July 2021, the United Nations General Assembly expressed its grave concern over the exponential spread of hate speech worldwide. In response, it adopted a resolution on promoting interreligious and intercultural dialogue and tolerance in countering hate speech, and proclaimed June 18 as the International Day for Countering Hate Speech. The resolution calls upon all relevant entities and organizations to intensify their efforts, in accordance with international human rights law, to prevent the global spread of hate speech and to more effectively promote education, advocacy, and policy reform. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres emphasized that hate is a threat to everyone, and that each of us has a moral responsibility to speak out against hate speech and respond to it firmly. Political and religious leaders, in particular, have a unique duty in promoting peaceful coexistence. They must work together to safeguard our shared human family, promote dialogue and understanding among different cultures, religions, and ethnic groups, reduce misunderstanding and prejudice, and create a more inclusive and respectful environment. Language and words arise from the heart, they hold power and influence. Hate speech stems from ignorance and prejudice, as well as emotional and environmental imbalances. When individuals face setbacks or dissatisfaction, they may externalize their inner anxiety and insecurity in search of release. Differences in culture, religion, gender, or political views, when met with a lack of understanding, can lead to rejection and intolerance. This negative energy may then transform into hatred, giving rise to hate speech. Addressing this issue requires a multifaceted approach involving education, social dialogue, policymaking, and cultural exchange. With conscience as our guiding force, we are compelled to pursue social justice and moral integrity, thereby mitigating the uncontrolled consequences fueled by hateful emotions. To effectively change the current state of society, the most crucial force lies in each individual's conscience and selfless love. Conscience is a powerful internal compass that helps individuals discern right from wrong and guides them to choose the right path, leading to positive transformation in the face of difficult decisions. Conscience awakens empathy, the ability to feel and understand the suffering of others, which naturally gives rise to selfless love. Conscience reminds us to adhere to moral and ethical principles, while selfless love fosters tolerance and reconciles divisions within society. Together with wisdom and courage, it paves the way for the implementation of sound policies that foster more inclusive and compassionate communities, encourage communication and understanding, uphold freedom of speech, and curb the spread of hate speech. Conscience compels individuals and society to reflect and improve, to care for others, and to take action that drives social change and fosters a warmer, more united community. Conscience is like a torch. When we unite in solidarity and work together, we can dispel the darkness and illuminate the path ahead. Guided by conscience, we can heal hatred and division, become advocates for peace, and help build a more harmonious world. The International Day for Countering Hate Speech is both a reflection on past events and a call to action. We must rise, speak out, and take concrete steps to create platforms for dialogue that foster social consensus. Let us begin by seeking inner balance and creating an environment of love and gratitude for ourselves and our families. Through technology and the internet, we can proactively establish platforms for kind and constructive dialogue, while cutting off or refusing to echo any form of hate speech. At the same time, governments and organizations around the world must enact relevant laws and develop effective strategies to address the spread of hate speech. Only then can we achieve meaningful harmony on both individual and systemic levels. Let us all become advocates for love and conscience, spreading kindness through our words and writing, respecting human rights, uniting in good deeds, and cultivating openness, honesty, mutual trust, and care for one another as we strive together for a brighter future. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Hong. As Dr. Hong mentioned, conscience is like a torch. When we unite in solidarity and work together, we can dispel the darkness and illuminate the path ahead. Guided by conscience, we can heal hatred and division, become advocates for peace, and help build a more harmonious world. For today's celebration, our special guest is that guiding light. And for today's celebration of the International Day for Countering Hate Speech, we have Mr. Hans Newt, president of the Gerard Newt Foundation for Freedom of Religion or Belief, to share his thoughts and experience with us. Hi, Mr. Newt, welcome.
Hey, Judy, good to see you again.
Yes, of course, always a pleasure. And I think you're the perfect person for this topic. I think so. From my personal experience, it's always been a pleasure, and you always have the most encouraging words. And so we want to dive into your thoughts a little deeper today. And so starting with, in your view, what is the root cause of hate speech, and how can we address it through education or conscience?
Good questions. Very important questions. And I'm so happy that you people are organizing this, because these are the right questions to ask. Because only after you ask the question, you can find solutions. And so you are the perfect example. Well done. So the question about the root causes, I think there are quite a few, and there's different ways of looking at it. And I'm convinced that hate speech comes from people who pridefully assume that their opinions count, or from people who have thus been victimized, so that it makes them angry. In both cases, they're bad coping strategies, right?
Yeah.
Hate speech is a bad coping strategy, and it makes the world a worse place rather than a better place. So you think you want to solve the problem, but it's actually making it worse. So I think that's on an individual basis, but I think if you extrapolate on a larger and a social scale, it's not an isolated phenomenon, but it emerges from a complex interplay of individual, social, and of course structural factors. Psychological research suggests that in-group, out-group dynamics, fear of others, and the need for social identity contribute significantly to prejudice and ultimately, of course, hateful expression. So structural inequalities, historical grievances, and political manipulation can further exacerbate these tendencies. Now, a crucial root, I think, a cause for hate speech is so-called learned intolerance. From early childhood, we observe societal norms, stereotypes, and biases through socialization processes. I remember studying this years ago. There's a guy called Albert Bandura. He wrote a book on it. It's about this thick, 1977, and for me, it's like a Bible on social learning. And he talks about this, and I learned that there are that we develop norms of exclusion or dehumanization, and these are the ground work of hate speech, of course. And additionally, cognitive biases such as confirmation bias and the fundamental attribution error that comes from another professor, by the way, that I studied under, Patterson and Swisler, Al Swisler. They make individuals prone to misjudging and vilifying others. So the fundamental attribution error is assuming that if someone does something wrong, it's because he did it on purpose wrong. And there's a whole book written on it. What was the name? The Balancing Act. And it explains how when someone does something wrong, it's not because he wants to do it wrong, but often because he's incapable of doing it right. He doesn't know what the outcome is supposed to be. He doesn't have the tools or whatever reasons. And all these elements, when you attribute someone's fault to that he does it on purpose, it actually creates anger instead of creating peace and fixing the problem. And then there's another aspect that I found myself, that I think it's not easy to develop opinions that run counter to people's own culture. You have opinions, but the opinions are formed because you're raised in that country where those opinions are dominant. If I would have been raised in Taiwan, I would have thought like a Taiwanese, but I'm raised as a Dutch, so I think like a Dutch. And it's really difficult to overcome that. One needs to consciously learn to question popular opinions. And questioning one's own assumption is a skill that you have to learn. Educating people to think for themselves holds transformative potential to address these deep-seated issues. There's a guy called Paulo Freire, a professor. He argued in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, education should be the dialogical process that fosters critical consciousness. By teaching students to critically examine societal narratives and challenge stereotypes, and then reflect on their own assumptions, education can cultivate empathy, moral reasoning, and a sense of shared humanity. And then there are moral development theories, such as the proposed by Kohlberg in 1981, who emphasized the role of conscience in ethical decision-making. When individuals progress through their highest stages of moral reasoning, they become more capable of understanding the perspective and dignity of others. Thus, curricula, school books and so on, that emphasize ethical reflection, intercultural dialogue, and human rights education can nurture the internal moral compass necessary to resist hate speech. And I also looked at it from a religious perspective. I think each religion teaches the antidotes of feelings of pride and hurt. They are found in humility and forgiveness. Hate speech is the opposite to both. It denies forgiveness, and it is caused by a pride, assuming that we actually smarter than the rest of the world. How stupid can you get when you think that, right?
Yeah.
And in the Bible, there's a real interesting scripture, and I never thought about it before, but now I connected it. In the New Testament, in Matthew 5, chapter 5, verse 22, it says, "But I say unto you that if you are angry with your brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say raka, I will explain what that means, you will be liable to the hell of fire." Now that sounds very harsh, right? But the word raka in Hebrew means empty or worthless. So it's derogatory language, like idiot or blockhead or imbecile. You know, when we drive a car and somebody does something stupid, you stupid idiot or whatever. But the moment we do that, it's actually derogatory language, and we're not forgiving, and we actually assume that we know better. And as we do that, it progresses from internal anger to verbal abuse to eventually moral condemnation. And in my religion, there's a scripture too that hits home very well. And I happened to study it this morning. I don't know, for somebody up there steered me to it. It says, "Wherefore I say unto you that you ought forgive one another. For he that forgiveth not his brother his trespasses standeth condemnation before the Lord. For there remaineth in him the greater sin. I, the Lord, will forgive whom I will forgive. But of you it is required to forgive all men. And you ought to say in your hearts, Let God judge between me and thee, and reward thee according to thy deeds." So I think that's where the crux is, where hate speech starts, and how it develops. But there's also ways, of course, to fix it. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth of your first question.
Like I said, I think I'm right. You're the perfect person for this, and I hope the viewers gained a few extra books to read and to dive into. And this is wonderful because platforms like this, we hope that people feel inspired to look into these questions. And as you said, it starts from asking these questions. And I really liked what you said about these hate speech comes from the fear of others, maybe differences that we have, and it's a coping strategy. That's a really interesting way to put it, and it is indeed because we don't know how else to act. And so becoming aware of this, and it's very encouraging to see more schools around the world starting to kind of pull back on these fundamental ideas of empathy, of love, of conscience, so the children aren't just learning about science and the languages and just the knowledge, but also what it is that as human beings we can do. So viewers, definitely check out the books, read a little bit more, learn a little bit more about all the things that are out there so you can have better coping strategies for yourselves. And I think, as you were saying, even in the car, the person who is driving, seemingly in a way that we don't like, they won't hear what you say, but we will, right? We carry on the same energy to follow as well, and it could, roll into other things. And I think ultimately it also does affect ourselves too. So encourage everyone to find new coping strategies to help you overcome these negative feelings that could be turned into something positive for yourselves. And next, Snu, can you share a personal experience where compassionate communication helped resolve tension or misunderstanding?
Well, I have a lot of experience with that, I think. I'm a slow learner. But I have learned over the years. I was raised by parents who taught me critical thinking. they gave me they were religious, right? They were really deeply religious, and they raised 9 children. I have 8 brothers and sisters.
Oh, wow. Big family.
And and they taught us to think for ourselves and not just copy the narrative of them or someone else or what they teach in school, but you have to think about things. Because my father said, it doesn't matter what the world thinks, but you are responsible for your own thoughts.
Mm.
So that was difficult for me to learn. And I once asked my parents how they were able to raise their children in such a way that all of them became and even remained religious. And they told me that they never told us what to do, they said. But they helped us think through the consequences of our opinions and the consequences of our actions. And critical thinking, too, is therefore like a medicine to consider the beam in your own eyes. You know, that's a big beam in your eye before you blame someone else who maybe has a little splinter in his eye. So it teaches you to look at life from different perspectives. And I remember one day, well, that happened more often. I was angry with my mother. That happened in my teenage years. And I walked out the door into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. I was really upset as a signal, like, I don't agree with you. And I stomped my feet as I walked up the stairs going to my own bedroom, angry. And my dad was home, and he was likely to come after me. And, I'd be scared and say, oh, now I'm in trouble because he's going to, be. But he was not angry or had a dominant attitude, as you might expect. He was a high-ranking officer in the Dutch Marine Corps. But he showed a skill that has influenced me greatly. He would enter the room and then sit next to me, look me in the eye, and rather than lecture me on my bad or ungrateful behavior, he would just simply ask, what's going on?
Mm.
And then he would let me speak with reason rather than stomping my feet and slamming doors. He never said that, but I had to figure that out, right? And so he listened with empathy, and he would verbalize what I said, not his opinion, but he would verbalize what I said. And believe me, he had reason to lecture me, right? But I learned a lot from this, and he would not do that with me only, but with all my siblings. And over the years, I've developed a form of respect for those people that have controversial opinions. Um, I um, I remember a man who was very angry with me at one particular time. I was a leader in an organization, and he was really upset, and he wouldn't talk to me. So instead of calling him into my office, I took my car and drove to his home. I rang the doorbell, and I said, "We need to talk." And he was really angry with me. And I said, "Okay, well, let's sit down and let's figure out what your opinion is. What are you thinking?" And so he told me a lot of things that I did wrong, a lot of things. I mean, he was so upset with me, and I could understand that he was really upset with me. He was deeply emotional, and a lot came out, and it was hate speech. It was it was serious. And I just looked at him and I said, "Let me see if I understand correctly." And then I verbalized what he had said to me. That's all. I didn't give my opinion. I just verbalized what he said. And then I asked if I had understood it. And he said, "Yes, you understand." I said, "Do you want me to give my opinion?" He said, "No, I already know your opinion." Okay. So I left it at that. And I said, "You know what? I can see why you're upset with me. Frankly, it was unfair. He blamed me for things I didn't do. But it didn't help to go into the argument, right?
Right.
I needed to learn to just listen. And then I said to him, next time when something like that happens, would you come to me and just let me know? Because I want to hear your opinion about it. Just feel free. Make it. I try to make it easy for him in a non-judgmental way. So his tone completely turned down. Actually, I told him at the end, I said, um, you have been very angry with me, and you said a lot of things that were hurtful to me. Now that I'm hurt, can you help me to be less hurtful? Can you help me by uplifting me? Because I'm in pain. What you said really touched me. I didn't go into defending myself. I just said that I was hurt. And then he looked at me and he said, I don't know what to say. I don't know anything positive to say about you. And then I said, well, let me show you how it's done. And then I talked to him about all the wonderful things that he had done in his life. I'd known him since I was young. And I said, you did this and you did that and you did that. And I really respected you for this and that and such and so. And I said, how does it feel? He said, it feels wonderful. I said, can you do the same to me? Make me feel better. He says, I cannot. I said, that's okay. So I left it at that. But it took the anger out of the situation. And since then, I wouldn't say we became best friends, but we could talk to each other and we had a wonderful relationship. So it took the difficulty of the anger and the hate speech out of his emotions, and it made him easier to forgive me. And what I also learned is that I've lived in many countries. I've lived in the Netherlands, of course, and in New Guinea. I was one of the only white boys in school as I grew up. The other peers were Chinese or Papua, black. Um, and I learned to respect people from that perspective as young as I was. I lived in Belgium. I lived in Florida, in Texas, in Idaho, in Utah, Scotland, in Ireland. I've lived in all these places. And I saw over the years, I learned that my opinion is just one opinion. And I learned that there are so many different ways of looking at life. Um, so hate speech is not part of me anymore. It's just not in me. It's a bad coping strategy, like you said. It doesn't help, and it doesn't make me feel better when I do it. But when there's a conflict, we need to learn to solve the conflict. And hate speech is not helping.
Thank you for sharing such a personal story, your experience, right? And must have taken a lot of courage too, I feel, in retrospective, to be able to sit there and welcome all these perhaps different opinions about yourself than you knew. It definitely takes a lot of courage to do so. And I think it's a new tip for me too. Next time something happens, all we have to do is sit down and say, what's going on, to learn about their thoughts and be able to really receive it without forming our own opinion too. But it's respectful too to ask them, do you want to hear my opinion? Maybe they don't. Right? You can't force it on them, but it is, like you said, to be able to take away some of the emotions first, filter that out, and be able to see what the real issue. Because I believe for you, maybe you were thinking that if I was in the wrong, I'm willing to fix it because I care about you or the person or the institute, right? So, yeah, so viewers, next time something happens, ask what's going on. Sit down and, have a listen. I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that story, and drive and be there at the person's place. Go to them. Okay. So be active about what it is that you want to achieve and learn a little bit more. And so I think as you said, for yourself, you started at a young age because you saw your father doing this. So how do you think individuals, especially the youth, can become role models in promoting respectful and inclusive dialogues?
That's a really good question. During my career for 47 years, I taught youth, particularly in moral and ethics and religion, and I was teaching teachers to teach youth. And I think if you don't learn it from a young age, then most likely it's difficult to learn when you're older, right? Even though we should be wiser, but often we're set in our ways. But the youth can actually, once they figure it out, it can help them for the rest of their lives. So youth play a pivotal role in transforming social discourse. They have to learn it amongst each other first. And as then they get older, they become adults, they have to learn to do it with their children as well. So it's not just while they're young, but they're preparing themselves to become adults and then learn how to do it. And developmentally, adolescence is a period of identity formation and a heightened moral sensitivity. Erickson talks about it, if you want another book. Young people are particularly receptive to norms, and they can act as powerful agents with their peer groups and communities. But if they learn the wrong skill, like I said, then it goes bad. But you can help them to go through it by, learning to think critically about yourself and be kind to others. Youth can actually model inclusive dialogue by practicing this active listening that I described, seeking to understand rather than to win arguments. I really do not like the concept of debates. I'm really against it. I think it's an evil practice. That's my opinion, for what it's worth. And the reason is that the objective of of these type of debates are to win the argument or to win yourself, which is prideful. It's the opposite to learning from each other. So in a debate, I'd rather see that people learn from each other and build on each other's arguments rather than push some argument down so you can prove your point. That concept is so foreign to me. I don't understand why people actually like it, just because they want to win, I guess. Empirical studies show that active listening not only diffuses conflict, but it fosters mutual respect. And when people, or young people especially, learn to demonstrate the courage and speak against bigotry, they challenge social norms that permit hate speech to flourish. You see all these people demonstrating everywhere. And it starts with one-liners. And the one-liners is often, not necessarily always, but very often it's a form of hate speech. You don't like Donald Trump and then you hate him, you have to hate him. Or you don't like another politician and you have to hate him. Well, it's a more nuanced than that. You can maybe not like the person and you cannot like what he does, but there are other elements that you can learn from that person. And if you're nuanced and critical in your thinking, you can learn to disagree with a person and still like the person at the same time. That's possible, but it demands a higher form of maturity, and young people have to exercise this and practice this. And social media often both risks the opportunity in this regards, right? They see something and they react quickly, and then it's on the internet forever, and it can often be a form of hate speech, and it amplifies because somebody else sees it and continues it and continues, and it just continues and it gets worse and worse and worse, even if it is meant as a neutral statement. So we need to teach young people that these platforms, social media, are really powerful, not because only it is there on the internet for eternity, their statement, but it can be amplified. And so can inclusion and diversity and respect be amplified. So it goes both ways. Movements such as no hate speech and hashtag we stand together, illustrate how youth-led initiatives can create counter narratives that resonate widely. So it is possible. And importantly, developing skills in emotional intelligence, not intellectual intelligence, but emotional intelligence, including self-awareness, empathy, emotional regulation. There's a book by Coleman, by the way, for those who want to read it. Goldman, 1995, equips youth to navigate complex conversions and serve as exemplars of civil discourse. Schools and community programs can offer training in these areas that contribute significantly to building a generation of respectful communicators instead of hateful communicators. So I hope there's some tips in there.
Yeah, definitely. And what you were saying actually reminded me of my college days. There was a professor I just did not like. And I went home and told my dad, I just don't like her. There's nothing I can learn from her. It's a waste of time. And my dad said to me, don't say that about your teacher. I'm sure there's something nice to learn from. I'm sure she has something you can learn from her. And that was a huge reminder too, because I in the time felt very strongly about that teacher. And he reminded me, as you were saying, that there might be something nice I can learn. I never know if I don't get past that stage of anger, all these emotions. And so I definitely do think that there is a lot that we as we get older, we can learn and definitely share that with the kids because they are forming, they are learning these tools that they'll be using in the future as well, to be able to have that respect for themselves and also for others. And so, yeah, my dad had a huge influence on me in this respect as well. So, and lastly, what do you think are the roles of, you actually already touched on this, but just to kind of bring it home, the roles of families, the educators and leaders play in shaping speech that uplifts rather than harms?
Yeah, the basic social skills and values and morality are taught, first of all, at home,
Mm.
not in the schools. If it has to be learned in the schools, then you're too late. I think it has to be learned within the first 4 years of life. So most of your value systems, the raising of a child is done in the first 4 years of life. After that, you're just damage control, if you don't do right, then. But it's so important that parents make it, let's say, safe for children to make mistakes without the parents becoming angry at the child, but at the same time help the child to go through the mistakes that the child made. So in other words, it's not saying you are a bad child, but you are a great child, but you made a mistake. There's a nuance there.
Yeah.
And so parents can play a very important role in the basic values of life, values of honesty, integrity, conscience, you name it. So the ecosystem surrounding individuals profoundly shapes their speech patterns and attitudes. You learn as you're young. A family serve as a first arena where language values are transmitted. My nephew was here. I'm his uncle. My youngest brother, his son, came from America this last few weeks. And he learned some Dutch, which I thought was very impressive for an American. Why would you learn Dutch? Nobody speaks. Yeah. And so we talked a lot about the language and so on. And finally, I said to him, I said, you need to understand that Dutch is not just a language. It's a philosophy, just like English is a philosophy. There's American English philosophy, and people think differently. You cannot just translate words, but you have to translate the emotions, the feelings, and the philosophy behind. And so when you learn Dutch, don't just memorize words or grammar, but look at me, look at how I think as a Dutchman. You don't have to agree with me, but that's the only way to understand the language of the culture. And so there's much more, and you learn the basics of that when you're a child, and the parents have to teach you. And then, of course, the schools too. There's some research on this one too. Bronfen Benna is his name. In 1979, he wrote a book and he emphasizes the importance of this microsystem, right? The immediate environments like family and school and shaping moral and development and social development. Parents who model respectful discourse, discuss diversity positively, and correct prejudicial remarks lay the groundwork for children's inclusive attitudes. So I don't think you can understate the importance of the role of parents. From birth, we see them as role models, for good or evil. Our mother tongue is not just about language, but deeply rooted in values. And then the language is formed after that. And educators act as critical gatekeepers of school climate or discourse. I was actually some years ago involved in setting up a school, an elementary school, no, a high school, sorry, in Rotterdam, in the city of Rotterdam. And I was one of the consultants in that project. And I said, it is okay to teach them the social sciences and the sciences and the languages, and that's wonderful. But I think the core value of the school should be the way we treat each other. Because that's where real education and emotional intelligence is taught. So when kids misbehave, we need to talk with them. Don't just lecture them, but talk with them and have them reason it out. And when they still misbehave, we involve the parents. But because the parents need to teach the child, it's not the role of the school to teach the child in ethical behavior. The parents have to do that. And we need to give that responsibility to the parents in the first place, so they can feel responsible and they'll do a better job when they feel that responsibility. So, yeah, and at the same time, leaders in politics, for example, in religions, in business and the media carry a significant responsibility. In the Dutch government at this moment, hate speech is against the law, by the way, but the politicians do it all the time. And it's such a bad example for kids. They scream at each other, they label each other, you're an idiot, you should have known this, and blah, blah, blah. And it's not helping. It's self-aggrandizement, but and it doesn't help the other. I think it's foolish. It's such a shame. But we have a lot of influence there if we want to use it. Let parents do their work, I would say, in the first place.
And it's so cool that you were part of the forming of a school and to be able to bring that perspective on early. It really brings hope, you know. I think it's going to be a great school, or it has happened already. It's a great school if the teachers are aware of what it is that they can do. And of course, bringing on the parents. And like you said, with the kids, a lot of times we're afraid to own up to our own mistakes. And so learning to be able to deal with that at an early age is very important. That it's not the fact that we can't, but how do we deal with the mistakes is very important. But like I said, thank you for joining us today. I reaffirm you're the perfect person for this topic. And I have to say, very impressive how you remembered all the authors and the years.
Yeah. Well, it was mostly during the time that I was going to school studying this stuff. I studied organizational behavior
Okay.
and organizational anthropology. So I looked at cultures and how I always wanted to know, why do people do what they do?
Yeah.
It's always been my question, right? And I learned that I would say 95% of what we do is learned behavior or learned thinking from our environment. And so if you want to fix that, you have to understand it first and then help the organization to change itself. And then the people will change, not the other way around.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, again, Mr. Hansnu, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope the viewers have a little bit more to engage in this week because of the books that you introduced to all of us and new practices. Ask what's going on and be able to receive different opinions without forming our own first. And starting with countering hate speech, let us dive into ourselves and find the love, the empathy, and the words of conscience that you were born with, and be able to allow the positive energy to spread to the world. Thank you once again for joining us today.
Judy, it was my pleasure. And I hope to see you again sometime again.
Sounds good. What a wonderful conversation with Mr. Hans Newt. I learned a lot, and hopefully you enjoyed it and learned some tips for yourselves as well. The United Nations created a series of videos about the impacts of hate speech. This next one we'd like to share with you talks about hate speech's impact on children. Pascal Valet, principal of the junior school at the United Nations International School, speaks about the impact of hate speech on children. The video will be followed by a speech by Professor Michael Martel, estimating the measurable annual cost of hate crimes. Let's enjoy these videos.
Anyone is going to be vulnerable to hate speech, and an adult is going to be vulnerable to hate speech. But maybe from my perspective as a principal in elementary, in our junior school, we can see how a student can be sponge, how they can absorb the world, how they can develop their own understanding, their own identity. It's a complex question in some ways to create empathy. I can answer from an educator perspective. When we're going to develop a curriculum that is going to allow the student to engage in understanding the diversity of the world, being able to see the differences, it's when you can start to build empathy too. So you see people being different and you humanize them too. When we're going to talk about conflict, for example, beyond the conflict and how we can disagree with what adults are going to do in this world, we want to see also that there is some human being. That even though they can be parts of a country that can be in opposition with my own country here, they are human beings. So to try to humanize people and to try to understand the diversity is how we can really support empathy. We want our students to be able to learn mathematics, literacy, to read and to write, to do science. We want that. All the schools are doing that today. And there is something maybe that is even more important than that. The character of the students that we want to be able to develop. We want them to be open-minded. We want them to be caring. We want them to be risk-taker. We want them to be knowledgeable. We want them to be principled. Those values are extremely important. They're the value that will allow the student to adapt to any circumstances, but they are the values also that will allow them to understand the diversity of the world, and we'll be able to go from a place of lack of understanding to a place of understanding. And it is understanding that will allow us to be successful against hate speech.
We calculate the cost of so many things. We calculate the cost of potholes. We calculate the cost of not wearing your seatbelt. We calculate the cost of things that affect our everyday lives all of the time to understand how we can make things better. But what we don't do is we haven't really calculated the cost of hate or the cost of hate crimes. And so in doing so, I estimate that hate crimes cost the United States at least $3.4 billion every single year. You know, if you think about the cost of hate, it's like hate crimes are kind of like a recession every single year. And we're policymakers, the Federal Reserve, everybody's always really concerned if there's even hints of a recession. But the fact that we could be in one all of the time because of hate is something that we should really care about. One of the reasons why hate crimes probably cost a lot more than $3 billion a year is that we underestimate how much psychological damage hate crimes do. And in particular, because when we think about hate crimes are like a crime against a particular person or a particular victim, but they're also crimes against a community. And so when there was the shooting at the Pulse nightclub a few years ago, like queer people around the country were afraid. And so the people who were shot and died at the nightclub were victims, and the people who were at the nightclub and survived were victims, and their families were victims, but then like millions of people around the country were afraid, and they were also victims, and they have lower quality of life. And so I think that hate is so pervasive that we really can't estimate how much it costs, because we don't we can't really see or maybe imagine a world without it, in a way that like hate constrains our opportunities. It keeps people from like finishing school. It keeps people from being productive citizens. It keeps people from living their authentic selves and contributing to the world in the way that they can. And so we can't really imagine how much it costs, but the cost is huge. Even a small hate crime is really expensive. So every single one that we can avert, that's a big return.
So let us avert hate crimes together by actively awakening people's conscience. We can start with ourselves and allow the positivity to grow and naturally affect others. We will continue this positive energy on the platform and hope you will join us on this journey too. Our next event will be July 25th to celebrate the United Nations adoption of the International Day of Conscience. Be sure to join us then. Thank you. We'll see you next time.